Great. Well, it's lovely to see you all here in the Shrine Room, and a welcome to those of you online. My name is Suvana Jyoti, and I'm going to be doing the talk today. I used to work as part of, some of you will know this, I used to work as part of the centre team here at the North London Centre. I was here for 5 years, and I just left last year, but I still come back now and again to see everyone and guest do something like this. So it's really lovely to see such a thriving Saturday morning. Great. So I'll try and do a little bit of a recap because we are, this term has been spent, or Saturday mornings this term has been spent on the Four Noble Truths. So we've already had the first three. So I'll give you a very whistle-stop summary of the first three. And then we're going to spend the rest of the morning talking about the fourth one. So the Four Noble Truths, as legend has it, was the first kind of succinct teaching that the Buddha gave after he became enlightened. So it's sort of the very first way that he thought to summarize his experience and to summarize what was possible with the human mind. So the first noble truth is quite simply that there is suffering in life. You know, human beings suffer. The second noble truth is that the reason that we suffer is that we cling to things because that we want them to be in a particular way. And then because they're not, we suffer for that. The third noble truth is that there is a way to conquer that suffering, and that so that freedom is possible. And the Buddha is proof of that, because he saw that he went beyond this clinging that causes the suffering. So he's kind of proof that it's possible. He was a human being. He wasn't a god. He was just like us. So therefore it's possible for us too. So the fourth noble truth, which is the one for today, is the path that leads from suffering to freedom. So in a sense, this fourth noble truth is a kind of a complete summary, in a way, of the Buddhist path. And for those of us that are ordained, so wearing these cases, in a way it's a summary. It's one way of talking about what it means to be ordained, is that we've put this path at the center of our lives, and we keep trying as best we can from our unenlightened position. We keep trying to work with this noble eightfold path that will lead us in the direction of the Buddha's enlightenment. Yeah. So it's called the Noble Eightfold Path. You could spend a whole term, in fact, maybe you are spending a whole term on it next term. I don't know. You could spend a whole term on it. I've got about 40 minutes. So bear with me. It is going to be quite a lot in there. Hopefully I can just give you a flavor so that you can sort of get a bit of an overview, a bit of a gist. In a sense, a bit of a gist of what it means to really practice the Buddhist path. What have we as order members chosen to dedicate our lives to? And does that chime with you? Does that appeal to you to get more involved in learning more about the Buddhist path? Might it be your path? Okay. So that's what I'm going to encourage you to do, is to really reflecting as I'm zipping through this thing. Does this speak to me? Or what does this say to me? Okay. So there are, it's called a path, but in a way, it's not a sequence. It's not that you do the first step and then you do the second, then you do the third, then you do the fourth. They're all sort of intermingle with each other. So it's not, I was thinking when I was writing this up, it's not like the 12 days of Christmas. It's because they're all sort of intermingling with each other. So I've drawn it as a very badly drawn flower. It's even worsely drawn because it's got too many petals, but that was my mistake, so I obviously wasn't thinking ahead properly. So I will go through each of these in turn, each of the aspects. If you can't see, do feel free to move your mats round. So it's written on, hopefully online you can just about read that. We were trying to get that to work. You might have to make some notes as I'm speaking so that you can kind of follow. Hopefully people in here can pretty much read it. So each of these, it's often translated, each is often translated with the word right in front of it. So right vision, right emotion, right speech, right action. Our teacher Sangharakshita, who started our Buddhist movement, he prefers the translation perfect because right can so easily get sort of mixed up with wrong and bad and good and all that sort of kind of critical stuff. So I'm going to use the word perfect, perfect vision, perfect emotion, and so on for each of these stages, or each of the aspects, I'm going to call it, as we're going through today, with the idea that as we work on that aspect, we're moving towards perfecting it. So firstly, and at the center of the flower is perfect vision. And in a way, you can't have the Buddhist path without some sense of perfect vision. So what do we mean by perfect vision? So perfect vision would be to be seeing deeply into the true nature of existence. So not an intellectual kind of knowledge, but a kind of spirit, it's hard to use words, a spiritual experience of some sort of vision of how life really is, a kind of truth about the world. And that all might sound a bit sort of, I don't know, a bit woo-woo or something. But I'm going to guess that every one of us has had some glimpse of that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here today, I don't think. You wouldn't be curious about Buddhism, curious about meditation, if there wasn't something that had come along in your life to sort of make you think there's got to be something more going on here than what sort of day-to-day life and our general culture kind of delivers for us. So, for example, it could have come from personal tragedy, you know, when our world falls apart completely unexpectedly, and suddenly nothing is the way we thought it was. It could have come from a kind of some sort of meditation experience or some kind of mystical experience, often connected with natural beauty or something really awe-inspiring. It could have come from some sort of intense period of intense experience of altruism. Maybe that somebody was very altruistic towards you, or that you felt very drawn, so that you kind of lost yourself in helping somebody else. And as you get a little bit older, sometimes it can just come from the sheer repetition of watching life's joys and life's tragedies kind of unfold through your lifetime. So it's something that transports you into a sense of a vast mystery of existence. And that could be through joy, or it could be through pain. And sometimes you don't realize it at the time. I can look back now and see lots of examples in my life that I didn't really clock or notice as that as the time. But in a sense, it's anything that sets us on a path to look for a deeper meaning in our life, in our existence. So for me, I can give two examples. My mother, this is the sort of biggest thing that ever happened in my life. My mother died very suddenly and very tragically when I was 27 years old. And it was just like overnight. Well, in a second, I picked up the phone and my dad said, that she was dead. And in a second, it was like my entire world was utterly different. And in a way, I'm still working with the reverberations of that, 28 years later. So that's one example of how something can come out of tragedy. Or another experience I had was sitting on this side of a volcano in Hawaii, watching the sunset. And it was just indescribably beautiful. So that's another sort of example when you just kind of see that God, life and death and existence is just so mysterious. There's got to be more to it than the latest app on social media, or just trying to get rich so you can get a nicer house. Anyway, so you may be having some thoughts yourself about what might have been your glimpses of perfect vision. And however, what will characterize these glimpses is that you will usually be able to see within these glimpses something of what's called the 3 marks of conditioned existence, which in a sense is the 3 things that we don't tend to notice are the way that the life really is. So the first of these is impermanence. So we're always surprised when things change, aren't we? Even when we know they're going to change. Every year I go, oh gosh, it's up dark ever so early, isn't it? Every year. So that's a sort of benign example. But so one of the marks of conditioned existence is that everything is changing. But we sort of know that intellectually, but we're still always surprised when it happens. Oh, it's raining. Oh, So impermanence is one of the marks of conditioned existence. The second is unsatisfactoriness. Because we want things to stay in particular ways, and they don't, we then find that, we feel disappointed, we suffer, it's unsatisfactory. So that our day-to-day life is always infused with this sense of unsatisfactoriness. Like, even if you get what you want, because everything changes, it's not going to last forever. So it's sort of great while you've got it, but you secretly know, it's going to go. Like, you might be young and beautiful now, but you won't be in like 40 years time. You might have a beautiful partner now. They might leave you tomorrow. You might get a beautiful partner tomorrow. Great, just in time for Christmas. All of these things. But just in time for Christmas, and then what? It's all wonderful, and then the gloss wears off, whether it's a partner or a new car or a new house or whatever it is. So we've got impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and the final one is a bit more mysterious. It's insubstantiality. So insubstantiality is, in a sense, it's what's behind impermanence. So in fact, if you really look deeply enough at your experience, and you may have had this experience in meditation, actually what's really going on is that everything is just a flow of experience. And then we sort of put this label on it of things. So we say everything is always changing, but insubstantiality says there are no things, there is just change. So we might look at a snapshot right now, and we can say, you might think, well, that's nonsense, because I can look around the room right now and that, this isn't changing. This is a floor and a mat and a table and a shrine and a walls and whatever. But if you looked over a long enough time period, you when you do that, like what's it called, time-lapse photography, over a long enough time period, you would see everything in this room would decay and disappear, and other things would come up in this space. because there is just flow. There's just a flow of experience. So therefore everything changes. So therefore we're constantly finding things unsatisfactory. So somewhere in your glimpses of perfect vision, there will be something of that kind of interconnectedness with those truths, with those fundamental truths. So they're kind of hidden in plain sight. That's what's so sort of interesting about it. It's not something you have to believe in like a blind faith. You know, the Buddha was just like, just look at your experience deeply enough. And you'll see for yourself, you know, you'll have the evidence of your own eyes and your own experience. Okay. So it's all very well to have a glimpse of that and to think, oh, wow, you know, that's amazing, like me and my sunset in Hawaii. But if we're actually going to transform our lives in the direction of that glimpse of this incredible vision of something bigger and more awesome and more beautiful, we can't just say, oh, wow, that was great, and then expect to be transformed. We have to orient ourselves towards that vision and work towards it. It's a bit like if you're going to climb a mountain, you can see the peak of the mountain, and you kind of got to keep your eye on that. Like that's where you're trying to get to, but you've got to keep putting one foot in front of the other in order to get there. So that's why vision is in the center of my badly drawn flower. And because that's the starting point. That's the tip of that's the sort of the peak of the mountain, if you like, that we're climbing towards. And the other 7 aspects tell us how to a sort of comprehensive look at the whole of our rest of our lives and how to move towards that vision in all the other parts of our life. So you need the vision and you need the transformation. Because if you've only got the vision, but you don't do anything with it, it'll just fade and it'll just become out like a nice memory. Oh, do you remember that time in Hawaii when the sun was setting? Oh, it was nice, wasn't it? Yeah, anyway, you know, what's on Netflix? It'll just fade away. And if you lose touch with the vision and you just keep trying to change yourself in a sort of like frog marching yourself into self-development, that will get really tired and old as well, because you're just sort of pushing yourself, but there's no bigger vision. So we do need both aspects of the path of vision and the path of transformation. Okay, so we're gonna go round the petals now. So we've already talked about vision. And so I'm doing them in the order that they're traditionally presented, but do bear in mind that there's some overlap between some of them, that it's not a question of you have to do one completely before you move on to the next one. And I hope that will become apparent as we're going through. So the second aspect is called perfect emotion. Sangharakshita calls it perfect emotion. You can also think of it as perfect intention or perfect resolve. And this is about the transformation of our emotional nature in accordance with this perfect vision, with this glimpse of perfect vision that we've had. So it's about deepening these truths so that they're not just a sort of intellectual idea, like I presented these intellectual ideas about impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, insubstantiality. And you're all intelligent enough to sort of understand the idea in theory and to go, oh yeah, I can kind of get that. Yeah, I can kind of see that. But perfect emotion is when we've actually totally transformed our whole being to be living from those truths. So it's something where we need to engage our heart and our emotions, not just our intellect and our head. And we're so biased in our modern world, aren't we, towards everything's about the rational, the intellect. You know, if you learn something rationally, then people think you're knowledgeable. And And actually, from a Buddhist perspective and from the perspective of ancient wisdom, that's a completely biased, we've completely kind of lost the balance between the need for our rational minds. We're not throwing those away, but how important, how the depths and the heights of our emotions are every bit as important for our kind of overall experience of life. And one of my favorite quotes from Sangharakshita is, for most of us, the central problem of life is to find the emotional equivalents for our intellectual understanding. In fact, the quote is really, for most of us, the central problem of the spiritual life is to find emotional equivalents for our intellectual understanding. But actually, I'd argue even if you don't like the word spiritual and don't feel like you want to have a spiritual life, whatever life you're having, I've never met anyone who hasn't got some habit, something that they do that they know is not really very good for them, but they do it anyway. I've certainly got habits like that. And that's an example of how, our emotional understanding is not at the level of our intellectual understanding. Otherwise, we wouldn't do things that weren't good for us and weren't good for others. Right. So I'm just going to go through. There's a list of. There are some qualities that decrease, and there are some qualities that will increase, that are sort of indicative of how we're developing towards perfect emotion. So the three things that will decrease are desire, hate, and cruelty. So what we will be developing, in a sense, more and more, is non-desire. So this is a realization that our normal day-to-day lives can never fully satisfy us. So, you're never going to be rich enough to be happy all the time. You're never going to, be in love enough to be happy all the time. You're never going to have enough status to be happy all the time. All of these things that we all kind of tend to want and work towards, and our culture encourages us to do. It's not that there's anything wrong with any of those as such, but what causes the pain is our belief that those things will bring us some kind of ultimate fulfillment. So the more we realize that that's not the case, that's the cultivation of non-desire. So as we desire those things less, that in itself will make us happier. And Sangharakshita describes this as it's not so much that we're giving up these things that we might have aspired to. He calls it a growing up rather than a giving up. And he uses the metaphor of saying that it's a bit like, when you become a teenager, you're no longer interested in the toys that you had as a child, because you realize that they don't really do it for you. So you move on to something else. And that's the quality of non-desire. So we've got non-desire, non-hate, which is sort of the flip side of non-desire in a way, which is that when we can't get what we want, we can get very frustrated and angry. I mean, hate's a strong word, but really it's anything on the spectrum of anger and frustration. So I'm sure we've all experienced times in our lives when we couldn't get something that we wanted, and it really upset us, made us angry, maybe even made us hateful. So again, non-hate, if we're less invested in believing that these things are the answer to everything, we're going to feel less frustrated if we don't get them. And finally, non-cruelty. So as we develop more emotionally, we have a deeper understanding and a deeper awareness of how our behavior affects other beings. So a good example of that is humor. One of the things that's changed for me is I find cruel humor. I don't find it funny anymore. I used to find it hilarious, but I just can't, if a bit of teasing is fine, but that kind of humor where it's really, really being nasty towards somebody, even perhaps the people that we love to hate. So that would be an example of non-cruelty. And perhaps one of the sort of obvious ones is eating meat. As I've developed more and more awareness of that kind of thing, my sort of desire or my capacity to eat meat has dropped away, and I became vegetarian, like many Buddhists are, because again, that's obviously causing harm to other beings. Okay, so we've got non-desire, non-hate, non-cruelty, and then 6 other qualities that blend in with those. So firstly, generosity, or dana, which is the Buddhist word for it. So there's all sorts of ways that we can practice being more generous in our lives, not just financially, but in terms of giving our time, our energy, supporting people, giving them help and confidence. As an ordained Buddhist, giving people the gift of the Dharma, teaching the Dharma is seen as an act of generosity, because obviously for me, it's the most precious thing that there is. So if I can share it with other people, then, that's an act of generosity. So, and you could just reflect for yourself how you feel when you've done something generous for somebody else. How does that make you feel inside? So we've got generosity, we've got maitri or metta or love. This is not love in a romantic sense. It's a sort of universal friendliness and love for all beings, which we develop through our Metta Bhavana meditation, which some of you will know, some of you may not know. So we've got generosity, love, compassion, which is where that kind of love meets the suffering of another being. So as we practice, can we become more and more aware of the suffering of other people and other beings, and can we respond accordingly? That will be an example of developing more and more towards perfect emotion. And then we've got sympathetic joy, mudita, and this is where our metta meets the success or the joy of another being. So, if somebody's doing really well or something really lovely is happening for them, can we just really feel great for them and really happy for them? Or, do we just feel envious? So the more that we can really rejoice in other people's success and joy, that's an example of moving towards perfect emotion. And then there's tranquility or upeksha, equanimity. Can we become more contented and peaceful within ourselves, whether our life is going well or not? So when it's going well and when it's not going well. There's so much freedom in that, isn't there? Not being battered around by the worldly winds that Vajramitra was talking about in the break. So much freedom if you can, to the extent that we can be contented with no matter what's going on, and so difficult to do. And then finally, there's shraddha or trust, confidence, faith. The more we practice and develop, the more we can see the positive benefits of doing so, and then that sort of develops our faith in the path and in the teachings. So those are the aspects of perfect emotion. So I'm just going to put them up on here. I'm going to try and, because so we've got. I said I would do it this side, didn't I? Non-desire.
It works both ways.
It works both ways. Okay. Non-hate. Non-cruelty, generosity, love, compassion, sympathetic joy, Oh, my writing's terrible. You're never going to be able to read it online. Sorry. Sympathetic joy, equanimity, and faith. So that all sounds nice, doesn't it? That'd be great, wouldn't it? Okay, so that's the second one, emotion or intention, resolve. So perfect speech is the third aspect. So this is transforming our speech in line with this perfect vision. And there are kind of four aspects to this, as just a way of giving it a framework to think about it. So the first is truthfulness. And that's not just about not telling lies. That's also about all those times when you kind of slightly spin things a little bit in your favor. So that would also come under this. So we've got truthfulness. So we work towards having truthful speech, kindly speech. So in order to have kindly speech, we have to have a real awareness of the other person. Otherwise, we're just talking at them. And I'm sure we've all had a lot of experience in our life of being talked at. And we've probably done our fair share of it as well. So kindly speech, you need to have an awareness of the person that's in front of you, an awareness of their needs and preferences, not yours. So we've got truthfulness, kindliness, helpfulness. So this is about speaking to people in a way which promotes their growth. So that doesn't mean so that includes constructive criticism. Doesn't mean you just have to be nice to anyone no matter how they've behaved. But it's finding a way to speak such that they can really hear what you're saying and that it helps them to grow. And finally, harmonious speech. So by following, by being truthful, kindly, helpful, by bringing all of that together, we're kind of having a harmonizing effect in our interpersonal actions and on everything that's going on around us. So it's speech that kind of, not speech that divides. I mean, and gosh, look at our culture now. There's so much speech that is about dividing one group of people from another group of people or one person from another. So this is about ways of speaking that actually bring people together rather than try to split them apart. So we've got speech, we've got truthful, kindly, helpful, harmonious. Okay, so if you've managed all of that, you were doing pretty well. Then we move on to perfect action. So this is the transformation of our actions in line with this perfect vision. And so this is the whole massive area of ethics in Buddhism, which is the basis of the course Not About Being Good that's being run next year. And ethics is usually something that people, I mean, even the word ethics, ethical, can be quite a bit of a triggering word for people because there's so much sort of debate around, what is ethical behavior? How should we be behaving? Lots of disagreement around that. The absolute key point with ethics in Buddhism and what makes it different from how we normally think of ethics in a sort of law-bound society, conventional ethics, or a kind of, broadly speaking, Judeo-Christian society, which, broadly speaking, is the UK. I'm not dismissing that there are lots of other faiths in the UK, but I'm talking about in terms of where our kind of culture of how we judge behavior has historically arisen from. But in Buddhism, the absolute key about your behavior is what is your mental state that drives the behavior. So it's all about intentionality. So it's not about good versus bad, some external arbitrator or authority that tells you what's good behavior and what's bad behavior, and you have to follow it just because that's what the law is, whether that's the law of the land or the law of some kind of a creator God. That's not the Buddhist idea of ethics. In Buddhism, our idea is about the extent to which your behavior is skillful or unskillful. Skillful being kind of in accord with right emotion. So the extent to which your behavior is driven by those aspects of right emotion will be the extent to which it's skillful behavior. The extent to which it's driven instead by craving, selfishness, anger, negativity, it'll be unskillful behavior. So what that's saying is that our behavior, our ethics, we need to have a level of intelligence. We need to know what our motivation is. We need to be aware of that in order to help us decide how we should behave in a particular situation. So it's defining morality as acting from what is best within us, not according to an external authority. So we have precepts in Buddhism to help us to do that. The most common being the 5 precepts, which some of you are probably aware of. And these are principles, they're not commandments. So it's not, you must do this, you must do that. This is more like, to the extent that you undertake these training principles, you will be acting skillfully in the world. And that will have a positive effect on your mind and on people around you. So I'll just quickly mention So I'll just quickly mention the 5 precepts. So the first one is about not harming other beings and instead performing deeds of loving kindness. The second one is about not taking the not given. So not stealing, not draining other people of energy, and instead being generous. The third one is about abstaining from sexual misconduct, which means sexual behavior that causes harm to another being. That's the definition. It's nothing to do, there's no judgment about your sexuality or anything of that nature, unless it's causing harm to another being. And instead developing contentment in your life. Then we try to abstain from false speech and these other forms of unskillful speech. And we try to abstain from intoxicants because they cloud our mind. So that might be alcohol, might be coffee. I've got my coffee there, but anyway. So those are the five precepts of what guides our action. So I'm not going to write them all out, but I'll just write the 5 precepts because they're very easy for people to find if you want to. 5 precepts guides right action. Right, so from right action we move, perfect action, we move to perfect livelihood. So far we've really been concentrating on a sort of our individual, our individual behavior. But the Buddhist path is much more than an individual, it's way beyond an individual path. It's about how are we in the world, what are we doing in the world? How are we making our livelihood in the world, and to what extent is that skillful or unskillful? Because obviously society is made up of lots of individuals, and so it matters how we earn our living, because that shapes and affects the society that we live in. So there are some occupations that you could sort of see are like really never going to particularly be in line with the Buddhist teachings. Like, for example, if you were like a contract killer or an international drug dealer or something of that nature, you know, you probably have some work to do on yourself before. So if that's you, just, you know, bear that in mind. But what's perhaps more likely for us is there might be some forms of livelihood which sort of seem okay on the surface, but actually if you sort of look at what motivates them, what's driving them, or what kind of, whether they might be a kind of livelihood that stimulates others into greed or frustration, then that's questionable to what extent that is in line with perfect livelihood. So the effect of your livelihood on the world matters. And you might be sort of doing a job that's not in and of itself particularly vocational and out in the world, but you might be supporting. So say, for example, if you were like the administrator for, you know, a school, you know, a good school that's, you know, helping children to grow and thrive in the world. So you might not actually be teaching them, the children, but because you're supporting the whole project, that could be seen as a right livelihood. And of course, there's the obvious vocational things like medicine and teaching and, you know, charity work, that sort of thing. Provided it doesn't get to the point that it's so stressful that you are a mess yourself in trying to deliver to deliver that. And then there's the duration. The idea that you should, the best thing to do is to sort of earn what you need and no more. And then you've got more time to spend practicing and developing rather than accumulating. Okay. So moving on to number 6, perfect effort. So obviously all of these things require effort, but this particular aspect is really about effort made in preventing the development of sort of unskillful states of mind. So sort of guarding the senses. So a really good example is I try not to check the news too often, because I find that tends to put me into a more negative state of mind about the world. So that would be an example. So preventing the arising of unskillful mental states, and the second one is eradicating unskillful mental states that have already arisen. So that's working with the hindrances in meditation. And there's a whole set of ways to do that. And then we've also got developing skillful mental states through meditation, and maintaining skillful states by practicing, you know, in meditation and out in the world, by practicing our ethical behavior that will maintain those states. Yeah, so I'm just gonna pop that on here. So we've got preventing, unskillful, we've got eradicating what's arisen, we've got developing, and we've got maintaining the skillful states. Right. So then we move on to the 7th one is perfect awareness, or perfect mindfulness, you could say. So this is the development of a concentration, a continuity of purpose, an undistractedness. And I have to say, I think it's harder and harder in the modern world. And I think, yeah, my experience is that it's harder and harder, especially perhaps for people who've grown up with this wealth of technology and phones and things that distract us all the time. I think that it's a real struggle to develop the kind of concentration and mindfulness and undistractedness that we need to be able to go deeper into our experience and therefore deeper into our understanding of life. Yeah. So obviously, you know, our meditation practice is a part of that, but also just generally becoming more mindful and more aware in our daily lives, bringing that mindfulness off the cushion and out into our lives. And then finally, we've got perfect samadhi, which is a Buddhist word which Sangharakshita chooses not to translate. It often gets translated as concentration, which then makes it look like the final aspect of the path is perfect concentration, which isn't very inspiring. So samadhi is much, in this context, is much more than concentration. Samadhi is sort of like the establishment of your whole being in its whole depths and its heights, in a kind of higher level of consciousness. So it's much more profound than just concentration. It's the sort of fruition of the entire path, in line with perfect vision at the center. So I know that's been a very whistle-stop tour, and I can see people looking a bit glazed by all the lists of everything. But hopefully, at least it's just given you a flavour and a bit of a sense of the kinds of things that Buddhists, you know, work on and work with and emphasize as important in life. It's not linear, it's cumulative. It's sort of like the growing of a living thing. It's not like climbing up a ladder. It's like all those bits sort of feed into all the other bits. And the Dharma is of the nature of a personal invitation, by which I mean, or by which the Buddha meant, it's not one size fits all. So each person in this room will have had different responses to each of those aspects. We'll look at different aspects and think, oh yeah, gosh, I need to do a lot of work on that one. Or, oh, actually, I feel quite, you know, confident with that one. So, you know, the Dharma is for everybody. And it's also about us bringing our uniqueness to the teachings and working out what our individual next step is in order to grow.